Welcome to the No Shame Podcast. I'm John Groders. Once a year, filmmakers and producers, actors and directors from all over the world gather to be encouraged in the Lord and in their craft at the International Christian Visual Media Conference, or ICVM. We spent the week interviewing many of those who attended for our podcast.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame.
Hi, this is Keith Mitchell. I'm guest hosting for John Groders on the No Shame Podcast. We are here at ICVM, and we're honored to have Ben Howard, who has been a pioneer in the independent film and Christian space and music space for a long time.
A long time.
Welcome, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Good to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background and where you've been, where you are, and where you're going?
Yep, that'd be great. So I was a kid with an accounting degree who didn't know what to do, who accidentally ended up at a record company back in the early 90s, a Christian record company. It was called Reunion Records. Michael W. Smith was the biggest artist at the time. Rich Mullins did some things with Amy Grant. And that's where I started to learn kind of what I would call the Christian commerce world, if you will, which is that strange place where faith meets business. And, quickly learned that there's a big audience, and I was one of them who desired, one of the people who desired faith kind of meaning in the entertainment that I consumed, if you will. And at that point, it was music. I was a big fan of music, and music moved my heart. And so it only made sense that when you found music that related back to faith, that it could doubly move your heart in even more meaningful ways. So that was kind of where I got started in the faith entertainment world.
And what year was that?
That would have been 1992.
Okay.
About 5 years later, somebody came up to me. I was kind of in between. I left what I was doing in music, and they said, "Hey, I know a guy who's making videos with vegetables for kids." And I thought, that doesn't sound very interesting. I don't think I would like that. And then I met Phil Vischer, who you probably know. That's all about VeggieTales, and Phil was the creator of VeggieTales and Big Idea Productions, and I spent the next 7 years doing that, and learned even more so what a big audience there is out there for great, clever, wildly entertaining media that relates back to faith. Those guys are geniuses, and it was such a great experience to get to do that with them. Shortly thereafter, after leaving there after 7 years, me and a group of people made a movie, Provident Films, which was not yet Provident Films, but Provident Music Group got that movie. It was called The Second Chance with Michael W. Smith in it. And they picked that up, and shortly thereafter, Provident Films was born. The Kendrick's first movie, Facing the Giants, came in, and we were off and running.
Facing the Giants, I often will say, is the thing that kicked off the whole Christian.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And the death crawl.
Yeah. Do you miss music at all?
You know what? I feel like music is such an integral part of film that I still live in it. That's a key strategy behind every film that we're part of, is what's the role of music, and are they artists, is it score, and so I feel like I still get to live in the music world.
Yeah, it definitely is an integral part of every film I see.
Yeah, there can't be movies without music.
There's a great story about Chariots of Fire. When they made Chariots of Fire and they test screened it, the scores came back horrible. The producers got together and said, "What did we do wrong?" This low-level assistant to the producer just happened to throw out the idea that, "Did you guys know the music's not very good?" So they went back, they hired Vangelis, they rescored the movie, didn't edit a frame of footage, and they retested it, and it tested through the roof.
That's a great story. I've never heard that story.
And that's how valuable music, composition, all that stuff
I so believe it.
And our sound man Paul is probably shaking his head right now. Yeah, I told you music's awesome.
In that movie, that's iconic music.
It's iconic music.
It almost didn't exist.
It lives forever.
That's a really cool story.
If you had to look back at in the past, I'd say 10 years or so, what are some of the movies that you've been a part of that have really touched you and made a difference in your life.
Yeah. And so some of these may not relate back to faith films.
No, that's
but
fine.
We're talking about music. The movie Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash story, with Joaquin Phoenix.
Yep.
And Reese Witherspoon. That music was so powerful. That film was powerful because I know a little bit more about Johnny Cash's life too, and how he found redemption. And I'm a big believer in.
We were just out at the Cash Farm yesterday.
No kidding.
And met a bunch of the Cash family members.
Well, I'm a big believer that when we tell our stories of hope and redemption, it's important to tell the story of the struggle too. And that was such a great film. I loved the movie Juno, which was kind of a coming of age story. More recently, loved La La Land, and that being a place where music came in. And then the movie Wonder, I love that as well. Such a great film.
Did you read the book?
I had not read the book.
The book is
No kidding.
fantastic, and rarely does a movie do. I like the movie better, and I thought the movie they just hit it out of the park with
That's
that.
cool.
And there's nothing better than walking out of a theater, and for me, when I'm with my wife and kids, because rarely now I have teenage kids, do I get to spend time with them. But when a good movie comes out, they love
Everybody
going
get
with
to go
me.
see.
And walk out of that theater and everybody's in a good mood. You're just floating a
I'm
little
with
bit
you. That's one of the
higher.
great feelings. That to me, I've always thought the last song played, the song over credits, is
Yes.
so key in terms of helping people walk out of the theater feeling lighter.
Yeah.
Can you bring the movie together in that last song?
Yeah. What are your thoughts about, I'm a big advocate of, I like when, so my background was I worked in the Hollywood world for a long time as a writer. And what I discovered is there's ways you can manipulate studios and executives with messaging and them not know it. And I won't go into detail. I was blessed enough to have a couple cool movies made. And in some of the messaging we could sneak in there as writers that the studio won't pick up on. I'm not encouraging filmmakers to do that, but some of this, I will argue, like in the last Rocky Balboa movie, and this is going to be germane to the Christian space. And I know this personally because I've had friends of mine come to me and say, hey, what is that Bible passage Spider read to Rocky before he went out there? In that movie, right before Rocky, this is the last one, it's called Rocky Balboa. Spider, his old boxing buddy who works in Rocky's restaurant, comes in, opens the Bible, and reads a passage, and I think it's from Zechariah in 1 Corinthians. And they say a prayer and he walks out. Well, because of that little 2-minute scene, I've had like 3 or 4 friends who've never opened a Bible up in their life ask me, "What is that? Is that really from the Bible? They make that up because it was so cool." I'm like, "No, dude, it's really from the Bible." And so the reason I bring this up, I saw you speak in there about the narrow, the broad, and sort of the hybrid, and I thought that was genius. I would like to see the third pathway more exploited, because with messaging of faith and inspiration with a modicum of Christ in it, in that way you get more people. I can only imagine cross that whole spectrum, because you didn't have to be a believer, but you have to be a music fan. You have to be a person fan, and then you can't help but sucked into that story. Do you, as an executive, have people come into you and pitch you stories that you look at them and say, we don't want to preach, we want to entertain?
Yeah, I think that it's always about audience. And so if somebody comes to me with a story that has, let's say that it's got a $5 million budget, which is a pretty big budget for an independent film, and it's going to have some Hollywood-known talent, and it's got a sharp faith message, I kind of look at that and say, I'm not sure this film knows what it is. Because the people that want to go see Hollywood star are often not looking for such on-the-nose faith content, and will push back against that. And as such, I would tell you that most $5 million independent films aren't going to get much Hollywood talent if they have on-the-nose kind of content. I'm not preaching against preaching, if you will, but know who your audience is and what it takes to get them, particularly given the economics of your movie. And so if you've got a $5 million movie and we're going to go spend another $5 marketing it, we're going to have a $10 million investment. We need a pretty big audience that's probably not what I would call a bit, the audience that's desiring more preaching kind of films. So I'm making no statement about any of them being good or bad, just that the economics of them. I think a great example of what you just talked about is Blindside, where faith was never the point in the movie, and yet you had people doing things because of what they believed. That to me is such a great statement. That's more where I gravitate. I know God gifted us in different ways, and there are people who want to go and they've been gifted to preach, and sometimes they're going to preach in movies. It's great. It's my place. I love telling real life stories where we see people living out their faith and not necessarily having to talk about it, because I think that gets us indoors we don't otherwise get in.
Soul Surfer.
Yeah.
Louis Zamperini.
Yep.
I mean, those stories are just amazing.
Hacksaw Ridge.
We
telling
were in
true stories of faith.
I was fortunate enough to take my family to meet Louis when we were in Orange County. And he went to this restaurant and he was doing a book signing, and my son walked up to him and said, "Is it true you punched a shark in the face?" And he goes, "Right in the kisser, son."
That's awesome.
It was really, and the guy just exuded like life. He was like this was like 4 or 5 years ago. He passed away like a year or two later, but you could just feel the presence of God in this man who lived such a remarkable life. And Laura Hillebrand, who wrote the book, just did an amazing job of capturing that without making it over the top and preachy. So I'm excited to see Unbroken coming out too. Yep. But movies like Soul Surfer and even like Reagan, which is coming out. Are you guys involved with Reagan at all? And
the next film that I was part of is a film called Indivisible that was made at Provident Films, and it tells the true story of a Army chaplain. He's actually still active duty. As far as we know, we believe this is the first movie ever made about a still active duty soldier. And it's a great story because it's a guy whose job as chaplain is really to go over to war zones and help guys keep their marriages intact for when they go home. And he spent a year and a half doing that, and then he went home and just about lost his own marriage. And so I love stories like that just have people living their faith out, and it doesn't always work out well. But then ultimately we find redemption. We find where God is present in the story. Yeah. So I love those kind of things.
That's great. Tell me a little bit about your new company that's starting, Third Coast.
Yeah, Third Coast Content. We say content because we'd love to do movies, but we'd like to do television too and live events, etc. So we really aspire to do these things that you and I are just talking about.
How did that come about?
I've been at Provident Films for the last 13 years, and at Provident, we're in Nashville. We kind of live just outside the film business. I know just enough to be dangerous, and the most of anybody at Provident. And then I encountered some guys at a company called William Morris Endeavor. They have a group called Endeavor Content.
Graham Taylor is an old dear friend of mine.
Okay, well, so Graham is who I connected with. I went and pitched him a film, and he said, "Hey, that's interesting, but a company might be more interesting." And we started the conversation, and 13 quick months later, we end up with the idea of partnering together and trying to tell more of these stories. And it's great for me and I hope our business in that these are guys that have been doing this business for a long time. I spend my days right now trying to catch up, with what they know and getting to glean their knowledge and their experience and bring that to what we all work on.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
I love the name Third Coast too. Where we're at in Holland, Michigan, they call that the Third Coast.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that name?
In the media world, and so you've been involved in one of the coasts in particular, the executives tend to come from LA and New York. That's where they spend all their time. And I love being in both of those places, but neither of them looks like what I know about most of our country.
Yeah, you're right.
So media being made on the West Coast and the East Coast doesn't necessarily hit many Americans.
Yeah.
And so the idea of the Third Coast in entertainment is
I
something
love it.
that really
I love
comes
it.
between the two.
So when do you launch that? When are you?
We are launched, and we've
You're
currently
launched.
got something we're in pre-production on.
Oh,
That is a
wonderful.
great story of a true story. Took place in Mexico a few years ago at a orphanage called Casa Hogar. And there is an orphanage there, and they were about to lose their property. Their mortgage was due. They had a balloon payment due, $250,000, and the boys were about to be put back on the street. Where being on the street, under 18 in Mexico, their life expectancy wouldn't be great. They had a benefactor step forward who couldn't afford to pay their mortgage, but he entered them in a bill fishing tournament that takes place in Cabo, where
You're
the
talking
orphanage
to the
was.
sports guy here.
Yeah.
I love it.
And
All
so
right.
the headmaster and two kids who had no fishing experience hired the worst boat on the harbor. It's all they could afford. And they went out and they won the fishing tournament with the biggest blue marlin. And it's a true story. You know, it's one of those stories that's so incredulous that you'd never believe it if it was made up. But this is real. And the orphanage lives to this day because of the miracle of them catching the largest blue marlin in that tournament.
So who's involved with that?
Producing the Third Coast is producing that with Darren Mormon and Javier Chapa, who are two guys who have been out in LA for a while. We've done several things with Darren. He did same kind of different as me.
Yep.
He's involved in Indivisible with us.
I love those. That's a high concept sports story with
Yep.
underdog. It checks all the boxes.
Yeah,
I love that.
We
stuff.
love the story and are excited to be involved with it. And then we have other things we're working on that hopefully soon we'll make into projects. You know, that's what all of us are vying to do in this entertainment business is how do you get something actually in front of people?
Yeah, and that's the magic question. At this conference, I hear a lot of people talking about how to make a film, which is important. It's definitely a very important piece of the puzzle, raising money, producing it. I want to hear more people talk about how you're going to sell the film.
Yeah.
Filmmaking is the only business in the world where if I was going to make the greatest skateboard in the world, I'm not going to make this skateboard until I know how I'm going to sell it. Unfortunately, the filmmaking community does not do it.
That's so true.
And they kind of got it backwards a little bit. And what the film community is changing a little bit. They're getting more sophisticated with entrepreneurial filmmaking. And I heard you hit at that, like treat each film like a startup. It's
like starting a new business.
Genius.
Yeah.
And I thought that's what more young filmmakers need to hear. Do you have any interest in directing?
I don't. I am not artistically inclined. I can read a script and know if it moves me. I can kind of have an idea of who the audience is going to be. But I have to work with a producer who knows how to actually make a film. You know, I love telling stories and really don't know how to make a movie. And so I work with guys who know how to do that. And I think that's a key for anybody that wants to be in this business is understand what you do well and then surround yourself with people who do the other things well. There's no such thing as a one-man producing team, in my opinion.
I mean, you look at Clint Eastwood, he has the same people he's worked with for 40 years. Even Spielberg, same crew, same people. And they're smart enough to know that they don't know everything. Surround yourself with smarter people, and you will do great things. This is the No Shame Podcast, and we're sitting here with just a wonderful executive from a wonderful company, Ben Howard. And he's starting Third Coast soon. He's with Provident, and we're thrilled to have him here. And just a couple more questions, Ben. If you had any advice to give out to people listening to this, and whether you're a young kid, a middle-aged dreamer, or a retiree who has a story that they have to get off their heart, what would you tell them? What would be the first thing you'd tell them to do?
I think the first step I always tell people is take a step. You know, is get started. So if you're a kid who aspires to be a filmmaker, start making little movies. You know, get the family camcorder out, get your phone out. I guess we don't have camcorders anymore, do we? You get your iPhone out and start making a movie. Write a script. Write a 2-minute movie. You know, and so that's generally, I would say to anybody, what I say to me and our team every day is what's the next step? Start somewhere and take a next step. And so make a movie. You know, you're older, you have a great story, then write it. You know, but always try to know what's my next forward motion? And a lot of times we're going to hit a place where, okay, now I need somebody else to do something. Now all of a sudden we're out of our own control, but that's where hustle comes in a lot of times. But I think in almost all cases, we can identify a first and usually second step to at least get us started. Because when we go to somebody that we need their help and all we have is an idea, it's harder to get traction. When I can say, hey, I've done this and I've got this, then all of a sudden they start to respond to energy and not just ideas.
Yeah, I meet a lot of people who are talking about a great idea, not doing anything about that idea. And I used to teach a seminar, it was called Sit Down, Shut Up, and Write. And I used to tell people that when I was writing, the hardest thing for me to do was actually sitting down and turning my computer on. Once that happened, it was fine. But the act of physically making the choice to sit down and turn the computer on was harder than
Totally
anything.
agree.
And that's kind of like in life as well. Ben, thank you so much for
it's great to be
giving
with
us
you.
the time. I think we're coming down and pitching you in a month or so.
All right, I'll be here.
Hoping to come with John Groders and the
Good.
team to say hi and everything. And we love Nashville, and we'd love to make this our second home, maybe our fourth coast. So this is Keith Mitchell with the No Shame Podcast, guest hosting for John Groders. Thanks, Ben, and have a good day.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid. No shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid. No shame, no shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved.